This is a presentation of our research project titled The Influence of Cultural Identity and Socioeconomic Status on Climate Change Responses, compiled by Lars Andresen, Abigail Blue, and Adam Trimble. To present our project and findings, we created this website. The audience for our research and this presentation includes everyone. We designed the research proposal around a shared belief that climate change presents an enormous threat to our planet and our species, and represents a true tragedy of the commons demanding a collective action solution on an unrealized scale. The project was inspired by two interests in particular. In Washington State, the Climate Legislative Executive Work Group was formed to negotiate over how Washington State will meet greenhouse gas reduction targets by 2020 and beyond. Our research tested in general terms how residents might react to different approaches to meet these climate change goals. Taxes on individuals versus industry, for example, or incentives versus requirements, or government-led or private industry-led solutions. Our website has a link to the CLUE website, and this page has a link to a video clip which provides a brief summary of CLUE's progress. A second video clip is of activists testifying for a CLUE public hearing in Seattle. The second interest of our research was in understanding if there are different attitudes and responses to the challenges of climate change among different cultures in Washington State, particularly between native and non-native cultures. As this map illustrates, within Washington State, there are 29 federally recognized tribes and 7 tribes pending federal recognition. Some tribal lands are concentrated in low-elevation coastal zones and are at heightened risk for vulnerability to climate change impacts. Our research aims to include a broad range of cultures and socioeconomic groups in order to analyze the role of cultural identity and socioeconomic status in more depth than most existing research. We asked, how does socioeconomic status and cultural identity shape climate change response? To answer this question, we designed a survey using SOGO survey software for online or in-person responses to 31 questions, including 8 open-ended questions. In this short animation, you can see our research method, research design and strategy, and the limitations of our results.
So what did we learn from our survey? 78% said they were observing the impacts of climate change, and 93% felt climate change is moderately to extremely important. As for how to address it, 70% said they took personal action, 60% were willing to pay higher taxes, and 74% believe government should spend more. To begin analyzing our qualitative data, we categorized open-ended responses into themes. and ranked described personal and community actions into low, mid, and high levels. These scores were then put into a taxonomy table to help identify patterns with our key variables. Our findings from this data related to the level of actions taken by ethnicity and education. As you can see from this graph, Native Americans in the blue dashed line described lower levels of actions compared to Caucasians in the red dashed line, who described more mid-level actions. Level of education also had a significant impact. Those with high school or less in the green line primarily described low levels of actions. Those with some college described a similar mix of low and mid-level action, and those with bachelor's or graduate degrees described more mid-level actions, quite similarly to the Caucasian group. This is a model of the relationships we found that includes both qualitative, using green arrows, and quantitative with blue arrows. The findings in part support our hypothesis that socioeconomic status and cultural identity affect climate change perspectives and responses, but obviously there's more involved than just these factors. Looking at ethnicity first, along with the significant relationship we found between ethnicity and actions as shown previously, we found a significant difference between ethnicity and the importance of climate change to the world. Native Americans and African Americans rated the importance of climate change to the world at higher levels than other ethnic groups. Interestingly, there was no significant difference with their rating of the importance of climate change to them personally. Moving to the effect of education, it also had a significant relationship with actions as described previously. There was also a significant relationship between education and the combined variables of education with income on respondents' preferred approach to climate change policies. Those with higher education and income were more likely to support taxation, and those with higher education preferred more taxation, government spending, and industry regulation, while those with less than a bachelor's degree preferred household energy efficiency incentives and industry regulation. Income alone had no significant relationship to climate change responses. A strong relationship was also found between years of education and the extent climate change was ranked as personally important to respondents. Further, the ranking of personal importance was related with whether they took personal actions, whether or not they believed climate change is real, and its importance on the world. It was also correlated to factors such as whether their family and friends shared their views, and whether or not they had observed the effects. Lastly, although very few respondents said they do not believe in climate change, their preferred approach was household energy efficiency changes.
Our research findings supported our hypothesis that, indeed, cultural identity and socioeconomic status does influence people's perspectives on and responses to climate change, but only in part. The data collected from our 120 respondents showed that cultural identity or ethnicity did not predict people's responses to climate change. However, it did have a significant influence on their perspectives. Our findings show there are differences in opinion between the various ethnic groups on how important climate change is to the world. Socioeconomic status, though education more than income level, did influence people's responses and levels of personal action. What this means is, while worldviews and perspectives on climate change may vary between ethnic groups, the strongest indicator of what actions or policies people support or oppose is dependent on their level of education. Climate change is a cross-cutting issue that impacts our economy, our environment, and our future. While federal and state governments in the U.S. have not adequately engaged in assessing how these impacts will affect our ability to adapt, localized approaches to regional planning and intergovernmental coordination is desperately needed if we are to create resilient communities. In the spirit of supporting this dialogue and promoting local plans of action, we created this website as a hub for Washington state residents, tribal governments, policymakers, state agencies, NGOs, and universities to engage in collective action, education, planning, and information sharing. So let's look at how we hope this research project will foster progress. The Communities and Cultural Consciousness section is a forum for communities to share strategies and practice, policy, and political alliance for a stronger voice in policy action and practical adaptation. Environmental degradation and climatic risk does not affect everyone equally. First Peoples, immigrants, and communities that consume higher levels of seafood and live in areas that are at heightened risk for environmental pollution and climate disaster have more at stake. In consideration of the cultural diversity of Washington State and the rights of First Peoples and other at-risk communities, we created this forum as a platform for cultural and community engagement. The Industry and Economics section of this forum is to address our state's economic health and discuss the impacts of climate change and mitigation. Our state's fishing industry alone generates $1.2 billion in revenue and provides over 16,375 jobs. Our agricultural sector, which is 13% of our state's economy, generates $65.5 billion and is the third largest in the U.S. This is a forum that seeks to address climate change impacts to the industries that are vital to the economic health of Washington State. The Sea Level Rise, Oceanic, and Water Resources section of this forum for discussion, planning, and mitigation, where we seek to engage the community in constructive, solution-based discourse to find viable and collaborative interventions to address the impacts of sea level rise on communities, specifically coastal, tribes, industry, development, environment, economics, and policy. Lastly, we created a community resources directory to provide people with up-to-date information, resources, and actionable steps forward. Our hope is that this website provides a platform for community engagement, as well as a way for participants in our study and recipients of our findings to begin taking real steps forward to address the varied impacts of climate change in Washington State.